Well, hello and welcome to the Indiana Farmers Market Community of Practices November webinar, Grant Writing and More with Prosperity Ag. I am Christina Ferroli, the Grants Program Coordinator for the Indiana Cooperative Development Center. Today we have with us Christi Southerland with Prosperity Ag. Christi is the Managing Partner and works with clients throughout the United States. With a Bachelor's of Science from Indiana University, Christi offers over 15 years of experience in the ag sector. With a passion for ag and rural communities, she enjoys helping clients find solutions and navigating them to success. Christi is from Hamilton County, Indiana, where she enjoys spending time with her family, traveling, baking, and loves exploring her own community. Please remain muted during the presentation, and we welcome everyone to drop questions in the chat. And if you have a burning question, it's okay to unmute and ask as Christi is going through the presentation, and we will have some time at the end for a Q&A. So thank you and welcome, Christi.
Thank you so much, Christina. It's great to have so many people attend on a holiday week. So I appreciate you guys joining. As Christina mentioned, if you do have a question during the presentation, I do welcome you to unmute. Since there's not hundreds of people on the webinar, it should be pretty easy to answer the questions. So today we are going to talk about a few basics about grants. Just kind of go over some general ins and outs, some strategies, also talk about what we need to know about searching for grant opportunities. And then at the end, we'll briefly talk about some available grant programs. This isn't going to be everything. It's not an exhaustive list, but a couple that I think as a farmer's market or those in this space should probably know about. So Prosperity Ag, we've been around since 2007. As the name suggests, ag is the biggest portion of what we do. We do probably about 80% of our work is involved with the USDA in one way or another, whether it's an individual farmer or a rural community, rural development. Those types of things are kind of at the heart of what we do. We are located in Carmel, Indiana, but we have worked in 38 states and 2 US territories. So the nice thing is that, as the USDA programs start to get more popular, it is pretty evergreen across the states. So we do have a lot of experience with lots of different types of programs and lots of different areas. Okay. One thing I'll note is one of the presentations I did not long ago, somebody told me my PowerPoint was really boring. So I added some really obnoxious pictures so that you guys wouldn't be so bored while you looked at it. I know grants can be kind of a dry subject, so trying to just give you guys some visual interest. So before we go over some basics, one of the things I always encourage people to do is to do some project planning, whether these are things that absolutely you want to do in the future, or if it's more of a hope and a dream type planning. Putting down some thoughts, some suggestions, some things that you're hoping to do, maybe things that you've seen other markets do or other people that you work with do, is really helpful as you go through this presentation even. So if you guys want to take a second, jot down even just a couple of ideas, that's really going to kind of help in bringing up like any kind of questions or concerns about the specific things that we're going to talk about earlier or later. There's definitely a difference between what you need and what you want, and kind of coming up with the general thought of why are those important? Why would this be needed for my project or for the future of my organization? Along with that is kind of a clear definition of what that project looks like and those stakeholders. This is a step that you may not have yet. If it's a project that's more of a hope and dream, you're probably not going to have the clear definition. But if there is something that you guys have on the radar, having those types of items on your list is going to be helpful. And in conjunction with that, a clear budget. Having a really good sense of what that project is going to cost. And that could be both in time from staff and then also, in capital. So if there's items that you're actually having to purchase. So knowing those things can really get you off to a good start as you're diving into grants. All right, so very quickly, we're going to go over what is a grant and what a grant is not. We hear a lot of these types of little, phrases that we kind of want to debunk right now. So we'll go through these very quickly. A grant are funds that you receive from an agency, a foundation, a state. They don't have to be paid back. A grant is not a loan, so it's not something that you're receiving, you finish the project, and then you're paying that money back. However, it is also not free money. As any of you guys that have worked with a grant in the past, there is a lot of work involved with both applying for a grant, administering that grant, doing the reporting. So keep in mind that this is definitely going to take some effort. A grant are dollars that are typically reimbursement based. There are some programs where they'll give you some amount up front, and then you can get another disbursement later. And then the end, they may do, a reimbursement based on that. So that's something to keep in mind, is that you may have to be paying that back at a future time. The funds are for a specific purpose. So that's something that you guys want to keep in mind, is that it can't just be general funds unless that program absolutely says this can be for general purposes. So typically it's, we're looking at expanding, we're looking at doing some training. Those grant dollars are actually needing to be used for those purposes. So that's something that you guys will want to make a note of as you move forward. These grants also do typically require reporting. There is record keeping involved with that. And then there's also, on occasion, an auditing process that can go along with that. So that kind of ties into that, that those are not without work, and that you guys are going to have to know what you're getting yourselves into in the front end of this. A lot of times these grants can not be tax-free. However, if you guys are organized as a nonprofit, this is going to be something that is not going to be applicable to you guys. So if you are considered a nonprofit, 501c3 or otherwise, then you don't have to worry about that part. A grant is not without work. We've mentioned that. And they're also not always easy to obtain, depending on what program you're working through. They are competitive. So not everybody that's going to be submitting that application is going to be, first of all, eligible or be able to be funded. So each program is a little bit different in how that competition works, but they're not always just easy. You submit, you talk to somebody, and then you get those funds. One thing that we hear a lot from people is that they want to apply for the grant because it's the only way their organization can succeed, survive, be able to, continue. And that's really kind of a red flag for a lot of grant agencies. So we want to be careful that the grants need to be something that is not necessarily a rescue for your organization, and actually just helps you guys accelerate what you would like to do. We'll talk about that a little bit more in the future. So, but that's something that I hear from a lot of folks. So that's definitely a concern that grant agencies will want to talk through. So some important factors to keep in mind. Usually, depending on the project that you're working with or the organization that you work for, the projects that you may have written down earlier might need a variety of funding. I talk to some people that will say, like, if you could just find me $1 million to do all of these things, that would be fantastic. And I wish I could find everybody $1 million. That would be great. Just one grant done. But typically we will have to apply for multiple grants through multiple agencies for various parts of their project. So you may find one grant that could cover staffing and one grant that could cover supplies, but it can be difficult to find one grant that could cover everything. Eligibility is probably the most important factor when it comes to grants. We talk to a lot of people that will say, it doesn't really matter what they're looking for. Our project is really great. We really think that this is a good thing that we're doing. If they would just hear about this, we'll be good and they'll fund us. But realistically, these agencies are receiving dozens, hundreds of applications. And really, they are just scanning it first to make sure you are an eligible entity that can apply, and that your project is eligible. So if you're not paying attention to those eligibility factors, they very well could just get rid of your application before they even read the narrative. So make sure that you check the guidelines, and we'll talk about guidelines here in a minute, but check the guidelines, the request for applications, whatever it is that you're reading. It will lay out that eligibility, and we need to make sure that all aspects of your project meet that eligibility. Regulations might change from year to year. There's some programs that we'll talk about later that come out every single year. You know, they're very consistent. We know what they're going to cover. We know exactly what they're going to be looking for. However, I always tell people, don't assume that it's going to be the exact same project or program from last year. There could be a very small aspect of that project that could change, and it could greatly impact your project this year than it did last year. One of the easy ones to give as an example would be the cost share aspect. So in the past, if they only required, you know, a 25% cost share, and now they're asking for a 50% cost share, that could greatly impact whether or not you can carry out that project. So make sure that you're being very careful of those regulations and whether or not they've changed. Grants will typically have a match component. We just mentioned this. So it really depends on the organization. A lot of the USDA-based programs will have some kind of match component involved with that. So that means if there's a 25% match, the granting agency will cover 75%, and then you guys would cover 25%. There's some nonprofits and even some state grants that may not have that match component at all. That's okay, but you will definitely want to have that in mind early in the process so you know what that looks like. I know there's a lot of organizations out there that, depending on what that match component level is, that can really kill their project. So if they were like, yeah, this is the great program, we could get $100,000, but we have to come up with a 25% match, we just don't have that funding. That's something that we're going to need to know early ahead of time so you can get those things in order as soon as possible. The next one is due dates can vary and can also be very sporadic. So there are some programs that are very, you know, you could set your watch to them. They come out very consistently every single year. However, there are sometimes, especially with the USDA and federal programs, that they could just be anybody's guess. There's one that we'll talk about later called the Value Add Producer Grant. Used to always be open around February, March. It would be due around May. Then one year they didn't even have it. They just didn't even open the program. And then the next year it was open in December and then was due, I believe it was like in February or March. So that was one that I feel like I could have counted on. And my clients feel like they knew how to project plan based on those opening dates. But because it's a federal program, we're at the mercy of the national offices. We're at the mercy of agencies way even beyond the state offices. So those due dates could really throw a project off depending on you know, how you're planning for the future. Reporting could be required depending on the program. There are some programs that the reporting is very cumbersome, where you almost have to hire somebody in order to keep and maintain all of the records that they want, submit the paperwork that they're requiring. And then there's some programs that really have very minimal reporting involved. All of these reporting requirements will be listed out in a program's guidelines, requests for applications. They're called different things depending on the agency, but that reporting can be found there. Sometimes if it's not listed, you can reach out to the agency to find out what that needs to look like, because that's going to help build your application to know what you guys have to be expecting with that award. Okay, so here's some important factors to keep in mind when we're talking specifically about your project. So if you guys wrote any of these down at the beginning, we can start to think a little bit more specifically about this. So number one, what is your project actually? Is it expanding a market? Is it going into the winter months? Is it expanding into a secondary location? Really defining that project is going to be helpful in all of the next steps, which is searching for those grants and then applying for them. What is the need of the project, and why is that important? So really defining that early on is going to be helpful. Are the needs of the people that are vendors at the market, maybe they need some food safety training. Why is that important? Is that because then they can sell to additional opportunities, they can expand their reach. So defining exactly what that need is from the project is going to be what you do in that step. Defining a timeline. We'll talk about timing here in a minute, but defining a timeline is hard. A lot of these programs, especially the federal ones, can have a really long waiting time from when you submit the grant to when you find out whether or not you are awarded. So can you continue with the project if you're not funded? Do you want to get the project started now and then have the grant pick up wherever you are? Or is this a project that really the only way you can move forward is with the grant? Both of those factors are going to define that timeline. And those are going to be important to include in the grant application. So that's something you're going to have to put some time into figuring out what that needs to look like. A lot of people will ask, like, when can I start my project after I get the application submitted? And most of the time, the granting agency will require you to have a signed grant agreement before you can start any project related costs that are directly associated with your application. So I mentioned earlier, sometimes people will go ahead and start their project. Let's say you're going to be expanding into the winter months. You could go ahead and do that and incur some of those costs, but the program might say, okay, you've already done some of those activities already. We won't reimburse you for those because they're already done, but we'll pick up and start covering the costs for the next winter season. So it really will depend on you, your organization, your funding that you have available to be able to do that timeline, depending on how that looks. The guidelines should also give some tips on when you could start your project. They may even say, like, look, depending on what you have going on, we may not even want you to start your project until after that application, that agreement has been signed. So making sure that we're reading those guidelines is going to be giving us all of that information. Partners and stakeholders could be very important to your project, whether it's the city or the county, whether it's other agricultural producers that are coming, leaning into those folks and figuring out what they might be able to contribute. Is it they're contributing a location, they're doing some in-kind work from their staff, are they offering some additional services? Using those partners to leverage what you guys could be able to accomplish with the grant could really help. So I always tell people, definitely talk to those guys that you guys are working with, see what they might be able to contribute, whether it's on an ongoing basis or just for the specific project that the grant's going to focus on. Cast a wide net. So this one is more, if you guys have always received money from one specific foundation for your market every single year, maybe let's look at, can we expand who you are getting funding from outside of just that one same organization, and see if there's others out there that you might be able to approach. Whether you're doing that just through these grant applications, whether you're doing that through maybe a capital campaign, talking to your board of directors and seeing if they have some connections, really trying to expand who you guys are reaching as far as the funding goes can really pay some dividends later on. And then utilizing your members, partners, we talked about stakeholders. to talk about your project ideas. So I encounter sometimes, I work with some small businesses, and they will be very, they keep things very close to the chest. They don't want to share what they're doing because they're afraid people will steal their ideas or tell them that it's not a good project. But I think for something like what you guys are doing, talk to others about what you're hoping to achieve. Tell them your hopes and dreams. Obviously, being realistic about that. That way, if they have ideas, if they're like, oh, you know what, I actually heard about this organization that really might be able to help. Those are going to be valuable connections that you guys will be able to leverage for those projects. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about some challenges. So this is based on some conversations that I've had with others, whether they're nonprofits or for-profits, individual farmers. I would welcome any kind of feedback you guys might have about this, if you have any, because I know that there's a lot of folks out there that have applied for grants or started to apply or attempted to apply, and they found roadblocks. So these are just the common ones that I hear from most often. The first one is timing. So we talked a little bit about, can I start my project, or I really need to get this project started, but I have to wait so long for the grant. Sometimes between the time of application submission and the award could be 6 to 9 months of just waiting. It goes through several reviews. People are, getting antsy. So timing is a huge thing. A lot of folks will come to me and say, if we don't get this grant, we can't do this program. And that can be really heavy for some organizations. They want to be able to do these programs. So then there's so much pressure riding on whether or not you'll get that grant. And you're waiting for so long. And if you find out you didn't get it, there's a lot of disappointment involved with that. The second one is very complex applications. I hear over and over and over again from people that they want to apply for grants and they start to, and they look at the application and they're like, there's no way. Like, I don't even know how to process this, process the next steps that I need to be doing. And so that's a huge barrier for a lot of people. In fact, USDA has gotten a lot of criticism about that in recent years. I would say more or less the last year, they've gotten a lot of criticism about that, because they're expecting people to be able to leverage their funds, but people just can't even begin to start those processes to apply. The next step is technical assistance. So this is like, if USDA could provide some training, if they could do webinars, if they could offer like in-person hands-on assistance to be able to apply for these grants. But it's very lacking. There are some technical assistance centers that USDA has established, but they're usually very, very specific. I know that there's one like for some SNAP benefits. I know that there's one for meat processors. But really what those technical assistance centers do is kind of like filter you to the right place. So they're not always as helpful as I think USDA thinks they are. So that's what I hear from a lot of folks, is that I wish there was more actually helpful technical assistance available to us. And then the last one I hear a lot of is about logistics. Like, how do we realistically handle the application process when we've got other things that we're having to handle on a day-to-day basis? How do we handle managing a grant when we have so many other things going on that take precedence sometimes? So the logistics of figuring out how this fits into your organization and how to proceed with a project can be very overwhelming, especially for nonprofits that are already pulled in so many different directions. If anybody has any other thoughts on what they have found particularly challenging, I would love to hear that. Okay, we'll move on. If you guys think of something, let me know. Okay, so what we're going to do is go to the next step, which is searching for grants. So we've talked about the things we need to keep in mind about our project. We've got it defined. We've got, kind of a timeline, maybe an idea on budget. Now we need to figure out, where do we look for grants? There's a lot of different places that we can be looking. Not all of these are going to be a good fit for everybody, but this is kind of the general list that I follow. So grants.gov, this is only going to be federal grants. Their search tool is not the best. If any of you guys have gone on their website before and tried to search for something, it can be a little overwhelming. But if there is an open program and you search the key term, it will pop up. So you guys can look at that and see what might be available on grants.gov. If you are going to be applying for one, you will need a username and a password in order to access grants.gov. Typically, you can find a lot of resources for those federal programs, but I wouldn't really use them for a search just because of how kind of cumbersome their search tool is. You might be able to find some stuff. It might be more of a hassle. Another resource is called grantwatch.com. This is a paid service, so you would have to have a subscription to this one. However, it does have a mix of federal, state, local, nonprofits, all types of opportunities, and they're really organized by upcoming due date. But there's a lot of filters that you can also use. So you could look up local food, you could look up agriculture, and you could say very specifically what areas you're focused on. They're not as robust as others because they are kind of based on due date. You're not going to see a whole lot of grant programs that have been archived. So those that have previously been awarded but aren't open currently right now, those are going to be kind of missed. And realistically, when you're looking for these grants, you want to have a good idea of what could be coming up in the future, not just what is open right now. The next one is called Foundation Center. They recently merged with Candid. So if you guys as an organization, as a nonprofit, have a Candid application tracking tool, or if you use them to solicit applications, it's going to be one and the same. This is only going to be foundations though. So you're not going to find any state grants. You're not going to find any federal grants. The nice thing about Foundation Center is you could look specifically at a program, or I'm sorry, at a foundation. You can see what state they're going to be funding, what types of projects they're going to be funding. So it's really nice because it can give you a good snapshot of the types of projects they're doing. You can look up their 990 as well to get more details. This one is also a paid service. I do think that there are some associations that might have like an association account that people might be able to use. I almost feel like the Indianapolis Public Library might have an account that you could use. So maybe poke around and see if you guys have any resources, so you wouldn't have to pay for your own subscription to that. And then the other one is just like an old-fashioned online search. I never know what's out there until I start digging around. Even with these databases that I use, I still always will just drop the keywords into Google and see what pops up. There could be something that's completely not eligible at all. There could be some really good gems in there. But that's something that I always use. You just never know. You can be very, very specific. You might find something that's outdated. You might find something that isn't quite applicable. But that is something that is always helpful. So make sure that you do that. Don't overlook just dropping the search into there. So yes, let's see. I was just going to check the chat because it looked like there were a couple questions answered in there. It looks like the Indianapolis Public Library does have a grant resource center, which is great. I did think that they had something. I wasn't sure if it was Foundation Center. The services that I mentioned, so GrantWatch and Foundation Center, I have like an annual subscription to those. You might look to see if they have a monthly subscription. And I just saw it was Patty that asked that question. So hi, Patty, I haven't talked to you in a while. So see if that's something that they might have like a, just a 1 month service that you could do that for. Let's see. A new type of grant proposal, a request for qualification. So usually what the request for qualification is almost another version of a letter of intent, or something that's kind of like a pre-proposal. And what they're going to do with that is that agency is going to be looking at you as an organization and an idea on the type of project that you're going to be doing. And then they're going to be looking to see whether or not they want to know more information about you guys. So once you get that request for qualification in there and they review that, then they will let you know if you should be submitting additional follow-up information. Sometimes what they'll do is they'll ask for a formal proposal then from that. They may also just say, we've heard enough, here's your funding. So there's something that we could, kind of explore depending on that organization. It looks like somebody asked about logic models. Those are so terrible. I can pull one up here at the end and let you guys see kind of what I do for logic models, because those are very intense. And I always have to like put the right mindset on to figure out what I'm going to be writing. So yeah, if you guys remind me, I'll pull one up and you can take a look at it. Okay, so we'll jump back into searching for grants. Another one of my incredibly irritating pictures, but it gives us an idea. So when we are searching for the grants, we're pulling up those websites, we're looking through all of these. What I tell people is when you find an opportunity, read through the guidelines, look at the summaries, whatever we need to look at, figure out what type of eligible projects they're wanting to have submitted. If your project is not eligible, you need to take it off the list. The only other option would be if you have like a partnering organization, you could share that with them. But if you're not eligible, if your project's not eligible, it needs to be taken off the list. Don't keep going through the process, because as I said earlier, they could just remove your application and you've gone through all of that work. Read the grant guidelines. A lot of times they will give you, and I can pull up a sample here in a minute, but they will give you an idea of what they're looking for. They give you an idea on what the project's or the program's purpose is. And so reading those guidelines will give you a really good sense of what they're looking for in a little bit more specific than just that eligibility. As you're looking through those lists of opportunities, compile a list, put them all down, be as specific as you need. I always put the name, the due date, and the link so that I can come back to those, because you may think of something later and you want to come back to this. So keep that list running. If there's one that you need to strike through, take it out. And then finally, be realistic in how many you can apply for at one time. I don't know how many of you guys have applied for a grant, but there's a decent amount of juggling involved with them. If you're trying to apply for 2, 3, 4 grants at one time, you're very quickly going to be overwhelmed. Plus, then you have to think of what would happen if all of those were awarded and you have to administer all of those grants. So depending on your organization and what you guys have as far as your resources, just be aware of what that looks like for you guys to apply. Okay, so we've searched for our grants. Let's say we've got one in mind. We've got an application. This one looks really good. It looks very promising. What do we do next? This is what I call the pre-application phase. So we're not starting the application yet. These are the steps we're going to take. We're going to read the guidelines. And I know we already read them in the last slide because we were trying to, kind of see if it was a good fit. We're going to read them again. So get all of those details, kind of mapped out. You're going to want to make sure if it requires matching funds that you figure out where that's going to come from. Is it going to come from cash on hand? Is it going to come from a third party? Do you need to get a loan? So make sure you get that ball rolling. If it requires federal registrations, which anything through the USDA is going to require that, start that now. Before you even start the application, get those registrations done. They are very cumbersome. They can take weeks. If you have any questions, if there's something that seems confusing, if you're like, maybe I'm overthinking these, but it seems silly, I ask the agency anyways. That's what they're there for. Typically there's a contact person, sometimes listed at the beginning, sometimes at the end of those guidelines. Ask them those questions. It may seem silly, but you want to get that information cleared up as soon as possible. And then if you need to delegate information or delegate tasks, start that now. So let's say it needs you need a business plan and you guys haven't updated it in 10 years. Do you need to have, your lawyer, your CPA, or somebody put some paperwork together? Get those delegations done now. That way everything's kind of being worked on while you move on to writing the application. Okay, so these guys are having so much fun writing their application. So here we go. So we are going to start the application as soon as we can. Do not wait until a couple weeks before. You're going to be regretting all of your decisions if you wait till like 2 weeks before. Start it as early as possible. I always recommend doing an outline, even if it's more or less just to kind of, regurgitate some information from planning meetings or from reading those guidelines. Get that process started. We're going to read those guidelines again. I promise you, every single time you read those guidelines, you're going to catch on something. Depending on the program, if it's a federal one, there could be something as silly as single-spaced 12-point font. And if you don't do that, your application is not going to be considered. You don't want something simple like that to be the reason your application is tossed. As you're writing, be super clear and very concise. Most agencies do not appreciate very specific industry jargon. They don't want it to be so complicated that they can't follow. I usually tell people, put yourselves in the mind of the reviewer. If they have 10 of these to look at, they don't want to have to be racking their brain to figure out what you're trying to say. One of my kind of rules of thumb is, can a 5th grader follow what you're doing? And I know that sounds like it sounds elementary, but if somebody of that age can follow what you're doing, it's going to make the reviewer's job so much easier. You obviously don't want to oversimplify by leaving out information, but don't make it so complicated that people can't follow the process. Make sure that every single question or prompt in those guidelines is answered. The reviewers will have a rubric that they have to basically check. Did they answer who the stakeholders are? Check. Did they answer where this project will be located? Check. Even if it seems crazy, I will bold those prompts and answer them. I usually don't bury them into the narrative, again, because I don't know how many of these the reviewers are looking at, and I don't want them to have to search for the answers. So make it very easy for them to see your answers. I usually recommend reviewing your application a couple of times and having a third party, maybe not even in your organization, review it. Maybe a 5th grader that needs to review it. Actually, they probably wouldn't like that, so maybe don't have them do that. But you guys understand, like, you want somebody outside that doesn't know your project to be able to review it and follow it. And then finally, let's submit those applications in a timely manner. Don't wait until 11 o'clock at night when it's due at 11:59. I promise you something will go wrong. I usually tell people, for me, if you are my client, I need the application to be done a week ahead of time. And then I'm submitting it at least 3 days early. You just never know. The system could be down. One of your attachments may not be uploading correctly. Give yourself lots of time. I've had some people that are like, hey, you don't even have to submit, we'll do it. And I get tremendous anxiety waiting for them to tell me that it's been submitted. So don't wait, get it in, be done with it, and then you don't have to think about it again for a little while. Okay. Few more. So we've got some tips. These are just general. I'm going to go through these very quickly. Just because a grant is available doesn't mean you have to apply for it. I hear from people all the time, a grant will open, I want to apply for it because it's there. The money is there. But if it's just there and you're forcing the project or forcing some kind of program, those reviewers are going to see through it. So just because it's open doesn't mean you have to apply. However, you can be creative if the program opens and it doesn't quite fit, but you bring in some partners and now it does fit, that's fine. You can definitely get creative. Don't use the grant to save your project, but you can use the grant to accelerate a timeline. So if like, hey, we won't be able to survive the winter if we don't get this project, maybe not the right fit. But if you say, if we get this grant, we can start offering these additional services a year early. Now you're in the right target. Don't apply for a grant if you are not eligible. Like if you guys walk away with nothing, make sure that you know this one. Just don't apply. You're not going to get any farther than being reviewed and then kicked out. USDA, the state, other organizations see themselves as an investor, so to speak, in your project. They want to know all of the things that an investor would want to know. So we kind of have to really appeal to them in how we're proposing that project. So understand their point of view when you're writing this. This one's more for me. Don't email your grant writer every week asking for an update. As soon as we know, we promise we'll tell you. You can talk to the grant agency. They'll probably tell you we don't know yet. If you get a denial letter, you can ask for feedback from that agency and get that information and use that to move on. All right, I just realized this next one is a duplication. So we're gonna move on. Okay. Again, if you guys have questions, it doesn't look like there's anything in the chat. We're gonna talk briefly, and I'm gonna go through these very, very quickly. I have a handful of grants that are applicable for small farms and or farm markets, just depending on which ones they are. So the very first one is SARE. This is Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. They are regionally based, and it is ultimately USDA funds. Really what they are hoping to do is encourage sustainable agriculture. And they're doing that more like, you're not thinking like sustainable agriculture, like we're all planting milkweed. It's more through economic viability. We're being very protective of the land, air, water. And then also, how can the farmers make sure that they are doing the best they can? They've got a good quality of life. They can make more money. They can expand their farm. There's a couple of different avenues that those farmers and or farmers markets can follow. So in the North Central region, which is where we're at, they have a farmer rancher grant. It's open now. I think it's due like December 2nd. They can get up to $15,000 per farmer, and they can combine with up to 3 farmers total. So each one could get $15,000, and they can use that to explore sustainable solutions to problems they're having. So for example, if it's an apple orchard and they partner with some other orchards to try to explore, maybe there's a pest or there's a mold that they need to eradicate. This project would allow them to do that. It can pay for labor, it can pay for supplies, it can't pay for equipment, but they could use that to explore, all of those different options. There's also one, which I don't have listed here, but there's one called the partnership grant. And that can be a combination of nonprofits, farmers, other types of stakeholders. They can get up to $40,000. That one has a little bit more focus on education. So if, let's just say the farmers combine with the extension office and they want to educate all of those that are growing apples in the state about what they found, what they need to do, they do some field days, something like that would be an eligible activity. There is a decent amount of reporting involved for the amount of money that you receive for this grant. So I usually tell people it's a pet project. that you really, really, really want to do, almost like a pet project that you were going to do anyways. So keep in mind that there is quite a bit of paperwork involved with this one, but it is a fantastic program. You know, the SARE offices here locally are very helpful. It's an all online portal. And, you know, I usually tell people if you're doing any kind of ag, visit their website, because one of the requirements is that all the projects have to do reporting, and all of that information is on the website. So really great stuff there. All right, the next one is the Value Added Producer Grant. I think I mentioned this one earlier. So basically, this program is through the USDA. It is looking to help agricultural producers to add value to something they're already growing or raising. So the easiest example here would be somebody that was previously doing milk. They're no longer selling it to the co-op. Now they're going to make cheese. And so they can sell that cheese for more per ounce to a retail customer than they could to the co-op. It can really add tremendous value to the company by diversifying. So there is a planning grant side. So if somebody's looking at, is this project even feasible? You know, can I even make this work? They can apply for the planning grant to do business plans and feasibility studies. If they've already got those things in place, or depending on their size, they may not need those, they can do a working capital grant, and that they can get up to $250,000 for labor and supplies, essentially. And both of those are a 1-for-1 grant. So if you want $250,000 in grant, you've got to come up with $250,000 in cash match. This is a nationally competitive program. So those projects in Indiana are competing against projects all over the country. I think last year in Indiana, we had 1 application. So we really want to try to get this program to be more popular in the state. So if you guys hear of anything, if you want to share that with your folks, definitely do so. Okay, and then the last one that we'll talk about briefly is the local food promotion program and the farmers market promotion program. So both of these are available through the USDA, through the Agricultural Marketing Services. And really what we're looking at here are projects to expand local regional food businesses, to increase access to local food. So with the local food promotion program, there's going to be an intermediary involved. And with the farmers market promotion program, it is direct to consumer. You can see here the eligible entities listed. This is one of the programs that changed, I believe it was last year. I think it was the farmers market previously did not have a cost share, and now it does. But they did increase the dollar amount. So both of them have up to $500,000. There is some capacity building with the farmers market promotion program. So if you guys need to do planning, if you need to do, you know, any kind of other type of researching, those types of activities would be eligible. Okay, I've got my last slide. I am going to pull up a logic model. So if anybody has questions while I'm doing that, I'm happy to answer that. You guys are too easy. Okay, give me just 1 second to see if I can find one. Okay. Let me share my screen again. So this is a logic model. It's in a different format than probably a lot of you guys have seen. This is the model that we had to follow for this particular program. So this is for a historical museum. So obviously it's going to be a lot different than what you guys are doing. But this is kind of the 4 items that we are using. So we have an input. The input is what we will use. Let me make this a little bigger for you guys. So the input is what we will use. For this project, we were using a contractor or a consultant to provide assistance with cataloging some collections. So in this, we are using the consultants to digitize that collection. The next one is the activity. What is it that we will be doing? This is where we're going to get specific. There's going to be 4 training sessions on the specific cataloging software. There's going to be digitization, collection storage. There's a little bit more detail there. The next one is outputs. These are our tangible results. What are we actually providing as a result of this? So again, we've got 4 trainings. We have 6,000 photographs that are going to be digitized, and then 330 yearbooks and 111 city directories are going to be digitized. I hate that word. So those are our tangible results, what we can actually see. And then the outcomes is the last section. This one can be kind of the hardest. So this is the impact. And oftentimes these are not actual tangible impacts. These are more like the touchy-feely type things I tell people. So the impact or outcome from this one is that collections are properly transferred to digital files. The museum staff has improved their knowledge. And then now, of course, like the public has access to these types of items. So depending on the program, they may have a different way they want to see this. Sometimes it'll be in a chart. But typically, these are the 4 items that you need to include. Sometimes they might have an additional item. Again, I would highly recommend, depending on who it is that's asking for them, you may talk with them about it. You may say, hey, here's my project. Here's what I think my outcomes are. Does that sound like it would be along the lines of what you guys are looking for? Depending on who it is and what they might be providing, they may give you more guidance than others. It just really kind of depends. Is that helpful, that listing of the project logic model? Is there anything else that you guys have questions about? Any thoughts, things like that? Okay, we got through a lot of that very quickly.
Christi, could
Yes.
you take a second to share how we would work with you if we contract you
Sure,
in your services?
Yeah, so we are a consultant, so we work with all different types of organizations. Realistically, what we like to do is if you have a project in mind, we'd love to hear about that. I want to hear about your hopes and dreams and what you're trying to achieve. If you have a specific grant in mind, that's always good to know as well. Depending on what your needs are, we kind of base our services on that. If you have one specific grant, you just want to do that grant and then be done, we can give you a cost for that. We typically base that on your grant request. So, we'll get a fee together for you to look at. If you're happy with that, we can move forward. We are a small business here in Indiana too, so we're pretty flexible on what we need to do to make that work. If you have like a lot of different needs, you're not exactly sure what you want to do some research, things like that, we can also do, we call it like a retainer. Basically, you pay for a chunk of hours and I work within that amount of hours. So that could be doing research. It could be, replying to that request for qualifications. It could be helping you guys put an executive summary together. Whatever it is that you guys hope to achieve, we can work within that. So again, we are completely flexible. We could do, here's a quote for 5 hours. Here's a quote for 50 hours. All of our clients are so different. So we really would be open to giving you guys an idea on what that would look like once we hear more about your project.
Thank you. That's perfect.
Yeah.
Well, we're coming up to 1 o'clock. Does anybody have any further questions for Christi? Please feel free just to unmute and ask away. Well, it looks like you did a stellar job with your presentation. There's a lot of really, really good information.
Good.
Will I be able to share it with the group that's on the webinar?
Absolutely. I can send you a copy of the presentation that people can do with it what they want. So
Okay.
I will share that with you shortly.
Awesome. There was someone with a phone number. I don't know if they're still on or not. No, it looks like they may have popped off.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, I can pretty much get I have emails for everyone, so that's good. So I
Okay.
will follow up with a thank you email to everyone who's participated. And thank you, Christy, for a fabulous webinar, and
Absolutely.
wishing everybody a very happy Thanksgiving coming up and long weekend.
Thanks everybody for having me.